everyone. Welcome to our webinar. RFA and Global Relay have partnered and we're presenting a new framework for the virtual workforce. So welcome to the webinar. We appreciate everyone's time and look forward to the opportunity to present some information that is now becoming quickly the new norm. Bear with me, I'm switching slides here. The objectives for today's call is threefold: keeping devices compliant in the top 5 considerations, implementing a compliance monitoring system, and some fresh perspectives on messaging compliance. Real quick, just as way of introductions, you've got Michael Asher, who's the Chief Information Officer for RFA on the line, joining me. And my name is John Russo, and I'm Vice President of Compliance Technology at Global Relay. Michael, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about RFA.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Asher, our CIO at RFA. I've been with the company for the last 15 years, and we've been around for about 30 years. So we are a managed service provider to the alternative asset space, uniquely positioned as we have over 30 years of experience. We are a dominant player in the space with global presence and ability to provide every aspect of technology that's needed in this fast and developing IT world, with focus on cybersecurity, managed services for public and private cloud, as well as consultative support, whether it's in IT compliance or technology and support services that are on site.
Excellent. Thanks, Michael. And a little bit about Global Relay. A lot of you on the line are either existing customers or at least have heard of us in the past. We've been in business for over 20 years. We focus on financial services. Over 85% of our client base is in financial services. We've got over 23,000 customers globally in over 90 countries, and we currently service 22 of the top 25 banks. We're at about 70% or just a little bit over 70% of all FINRA registered broker dealers, and at about 70% of all hedge funds. So we've got global reach, and we've got offices in New York, Chicago, Vancouver, and in London. So the main topic of today's conversation is we've all found ourselves in this situation with respect to the pandemic. First and foremost, we hope that one is safe and making the best of a very difficult situation. So we wish everyone out there all the best, and we hope that things can get back to normal as soon as possible. But we're shifting from this paradigm where we're all accustomed to working internally within our organizations, where we have processes and controls to ensure the safe and secure environment that we're all accustomed to for businesses. And what we're up against at this point is that we've got a scattered workforce, and we're all making do with the best and with the technologies we had in place. And in addition, adding technologies like Zoom, for example, to facilitate remote working. In the past, we all had some groups or some individuals within our organizations that had the ability to work remotely, and we all think about the remote workforce, specifically around sales being typically distributed. But now this is expanded to our entire organizations. Everybody seems to be working from home. So there's some serious technology concerns that need to be taken into consideration. And Michael and I will do our best to walk through the most common issues that we're encountering, that our customers are encountering, and some methods for approaching each of these moving forward. So the topics that we're going to be covering is unsupervised channels. So I mentioned Zoom, but there's a plethora of social media and instant messaging platforms that suddenly have sort of been thrown at us as organizations to contend with. Unauthorized devices, obviously, things like mobile phones, tablets, home PCs that now are no longer subject to the strict controls that we're all used to. Unsecured networks is sort of another curveball. Everybody's working from their home Wi-Fi. organizations that did have VPNs installed for their remote workers are finding themselves in situations where they're deploying these VPN solutions to all of their employees to facilitate remote working. And then obviously all of this contributes to some unforeseen technical complications that we need to take into consideration. I'm going to dive real quick into one of the biggest challenges, and then I'll ask Michael for his perspective, is all of these new channels, whether it's social media or instant messaging, even text messaging, all of these collaborative platforms. How are we capturing this content and making it available for supervision, e-discovery, and just general security review? The chart you're seeing on the screen is an overview that our current customers are familiar with, but Global Relay does provide connectors to over 60 channels natively, and we can accept data agnostically over any channel that's able to deliver it to us via SMTP. So our customers over the past 2 months have seriously ramped up adoption of these platforms, whereas in the past, they're finding that they had small teams. Typically, IT was piloting, and then you might have distributed these new technologies to a subset of your users. But today, you seriously have to consider not only enabling those communication channels to facilitate your workflow, but consider how are you capturing that content, storing it in your archive or the systems that you're using to provide supervision and e-discovery. Yes, Michael, are you seeing similar reactions in the industry with your customers?
Absolutely. In terms of adoption rate of unified communication technologies, they've been brought front and center, and all the projects that were historically on a back burner on how to expedite unified communications, whether it's Teams or something else that clients are deploying internally, Slack, for example, has been expedited. So what we are seeing is that as people are trying to adopt these new technologies and make sure that people are able to work remotely and remain productive, we see that clear communication is key when relaying this information to your staff, making sure that you specify what are the approved channels that your staff can communicate and understand the compliance aspects of what's actually being able to be captured. And as Global Relay is a partner of ours that can help you understand what parts of communication are, for example, captured within Teams. There are some nuances that come with private and public channels where communication in public channels can be captured and communication in private channels possibly might be left out. So it's important to understand and communicate this information to your staff that although unified communication methodology and options are plentiful, what they're doing for work needs to go over a specific technology and make sure that the way that technology is being used is also clearly explained. So as with everything else, clear guidance and communication to staff is critical here.
Yeah, absolutely, Michael. What we're seeing with our customers is that a large majority of them did have some form of collaborative platform that they were leveraging, be it Skype for Business Online or Microsoft Teams. But when the remote working was initially mandated, they didn't have appropriate numbers of licenses. They did have some technical infrastructure limitations, and they started to all look at what is available out there publicly. So you started to see mass adoption of things like Zoom and Slack, and even social media, just in general, to conduct business across. When these decisions are being made, they clearly can't be made in a vacuum. All of the regulatory requirements that we're subject to still come into play. And although the regulators are putting out bits of information with respect to how to approach some of these things, we all have to consider the longer term ramifications of enabling these technologies. So one of the things I just wanted to stress is just ensure that you're doing your due diligence with your vendors, and ensuring that if you're adopting technologies for the purpose of business continuity, that you're taking into consideration the connectors that are required to ensure the successful collection of that data, and almost more importantly, the collection of that data in a format that's usable for the platforms that you rely upon.
Right. Another item that also wanted to stress in terms of unified communication, as those systems are being put online quickly, is the cybersecurity aspect that often is neglected initially. So multi-factor authentication, making sure that you're using the same password and credentials for unified communication channels as you do for your enterprise network, to make sure that there's the same level of security as you adapt new methodologies to talk to your staff or vendors.
Yeah, excellent point. So it brings us to our first main topic here of unauthorized devices, and I think that we're all quite aware that in the rush to distribute our workforce and enable the remote working, not everybody had the luxury of providing company controlled secure devices to every employee. So we've universally sort of accepted the fact that we were going to have to rely on these unauthorized devices, but supervision is still required. So if your employees are leveraging text messaging, for example, social media, working from their home PC or some tablet, or just sharing these unauthorized devices between household members, you need to make sure that you're aware of what your employees are using, and then putting the appropriate controls and sometimes processes around the acceptable use of these devices. So the first thing that we noticed is a serious uptick in text messaging use for business, whereas in the past it was strictly controlled who was allowed to use text messaging, and there would be tools that would be deployed either back end through corporate owned devices, or deployed to the end user's device with an understanding and possibly an attestation back to the compliance and legal teams on the appropriate use of those devices. As we shifted to this scattered and distributed working environment, it's just inevitable that the control that you had previously had is just not necessarily there. So we've seen an uptick, for example, with our customers with the adoption of Global Relay Message. We've got a messaging platform that's secure and compliant. A lot of our customers use it already today, but they've deployed it en masse to their end users for the capture of text messaging. Something to consider for your organizations is if you're allowing text messaging, speak to your IT organizations, find out what tools they have available to them, and ensure that you're capturing business communications regardless of whether it's a corporate-owned device or a personal device, if it's being used for business. Another example is social media. Social media has always been a topic of concern over the years. I've been with Global Relay for a little bit over 6 years now. We've got connectors to capture the most common platforms, whether it's LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even YouTube. And we've got customers that have been using it, but we've seen mass adoption adding users to their feeds because they know that their employees are having to leverage these social media platforms. I guess, Michael, what are you seeing in the space of text messaging and social media specifically?
I agree with you in terms of text messaging, especially we're seeing companies use WhatsApp, text messaging across the board, especially initially there was a huge uptick in third-party messaging platforms that cannot be captured and used in a compliant manner. And as you correctly pointed out, regulators actually put out notices that this COVID issue is not an excuse for not maintaining compliant environments, and that during further testing from a compliance perspective, companies will have to report on how they maintained integrity and security of the data. So from that perspective, what we're seeing across our clients is that um, firms that have adopted a policy where they're friendly with public cloud technologies and technologies that allow for easy access to communication channels, clients rarely try to circumvent the security controls that are in place. Firms that are not responding fast enough and have infrastructure that doesn't allow for easy communication see an uptick where their users are just trying to get their things done as quickly as possible. So from that perspective, they're trying to circumvent and go the route of messaging apps that are not secure. So it's critical that as we transition to back to normal working environment, we understand that it's not going to be the same situation as before COVID. A large number of staff will remain working remotely for some foreseeable future. So we need to implement testing protocols, how to make sure that staff is using the appropriate methodology, and you need to test for it, making sure that what you have is working for a long term. Because what as technologists and just people, we think in short-term outages, we think in what we know, and this pandemic is an anomaly, and we don't see a lot of firms exercising tabletop exercises during these stressful times. But that's something we need to think about going forward, that as this becomes the new norm, we need to update our procedures and testing methodologies to include testing for unauthorized devices and communication over unauthorized channels.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, and it sort of leads to this last component here, internal BCP communications. Uh, Most of our organizations had some business continuity plans in place, and you've got processes that you're following to facilitate the business continuity. But a lot of the tools that were relied upon, at least traditionally, with respect to the communications aspect of business continuity, things like call trees, um, you know, uh, text messages, just the bare bones. Hey, if our systems are down because there's a fire in a data center, how do we communicate? These systems now are being leveraged for business. So you need to go back, take a look at what your current BCP communication policies were, what devices are being leveraged, and make sure that you start to formulate a plan around it. There was a question in the board. We are going to answer questions at the end. We don't have a lot of time on the webinar, but this person had asked specifically about repeating the statement about Zoom and Citrix and related security requirements. And I think we touched on it here briefly on this slide, is that we're seeing a massive adoption in these tools like Zoom and Citrix to facilitate the remote work. What you need to ensure first and foremost is that you're able to capture that content. So just saying that, hey, we had no choice, but we had to use Zoom, ultimately, when this is all over, the dust settles and the regulators look back and they start to perform their audits, they're going to expect that you put some reasonable controls around the capture of the content. So there are vendors such as Global Relay that can capture this content. We've got connectors for all of the most popular platforms, and they are available to our customers today. So you need to do your due diligence, speak to your IT providers, and get some guidance as to how you're going to be able to capture the content. Moving on to the next slide, unsecured networks. So we have always had the luxury of focusing on cybersecurity with our internal experts and on-prem control over these devices that our employees were using. But even more importantly, the network at which these devices were being used was a secured network. You've got a chief security officer typically and a staff dedicated to controlling the network. And these folks put a lot of effort and a lot of technology in place to ensure that those communications are secure, number one, and two, that they can control the content that's flowing in and out of those secure networks. Now that we've distributed the workload you have to start focusing on where is your weakest link. So we've talked briefly about unsecured devices, but the networks themselves go beyond technology. There's been a few scenarios where we know that we've got husbands and wives working together out of the same home. They may or may not work for the same company, but they may have conflicting roles with respect to compliance. And now you've got these folks working either, one room apart from one another where you can hear each other's conversations. Even worse, if they both work at the same organization and somebody works in equities and somebody else works in research and they're working across the dining room table. There's concerns there, right? So where are your weakest links? So the one thing I would ask folks to do when you get back is to just analyze your workforce. Where are your areas of sensitivity? And try to identify what your weakest links are. Everyone will have some different scenarios that they need to account for, but at a minimum, document those weakest links and then start to formulate plans on how you're addressing those weakest links. I talk about home Wi-Fi. It's wonderful because it facilitates the remote working and everybody's on their home Wi-Fi. But home Wi-Fi in and of itself, unless you've got the technical know-how or you got folks from RFA giving you the guidance on how to set up home Wi-Fi, most of the home Wi-Fi was set up by the individuals themselves, or similar to my scenario, 12-year-old son helped set up that Wi-Fi because they're more technically savvy than you are. But a lot of folks typically forget the security aspect of home. So most routers that you buy, whether you're going to a big box store or you order it through Amazon, when they come to you, they have a standard admin ID and an admin password. And those IDs are typically administrator and admin or admin and admin. And if you've got sensitive corporate information being transmitted across a home Wi-Fi network that's insecure, the bad actors are out there. So you need to take those things into consideration. So start putting some thought behind what controls can I put in place. The number one thing that comes to mind is VPN. Obviously, everybody should be leveraging their VPN, but what you need to ensure is that those VPNs are set up properly and that folks are taking advantage of them. And if there's any limitations to your current VPN technology, we hear some customers say, well, my VPN is slow, so I avoid using it. Or I have a problem because when I'm on my VPN, I can't print at home and I need to print certain things. We as technologists, and for those of you that are in compliance or in legal, you need to put some added thought and control around how is your data flowing within your networks. So one of the scenarios I like to talk about is with respect to compliance supervision. We all have policies that we scan our data against, and the typical policies that a compliance team may be interested in is, anti-money laundering or Gibson Entertainment or front running or, the typical compliance policies. But you should also consider some data loss prevention policies during this time of uncertainty. So consider the idea that folks might be saying, hey, I've got this document I need to print, and they're sending it to their home Gmail account. So start searching for things like the word print, or, can you, copy this for me, or that kind of language in combination with private or personal email domains like Google or Yahoo or Gmail or whatever they might be. If you create some policies around that, have some additional due diligence around who your employees are communicating to and who they're sending content to. At Global Relay, our customers are accustomed to being able to perform these kinds of reviews and modify these policies on the fly, but we also have some advanced analytics tools which allow you to visualize the distribution of your data across your network. So you see how John and Michael are communicating and where we're sending our communications to. It's important to understand that this is not business as usual, and we need to focus clearly on what is going on. When those audits do come in, you have to have some documented controls that you put into place. So even the smallest, easiest lift, which is I added 2 additional policies to my compliance catalog, is extremely helpful. Michael, what do you see with respect to your clients and their network concerns and challenges?
It's an interesting time because historically, home networks were not focus of hijackers, malicious actors, because for them it's a business, and whenever you run a business in this situation, a very nefarious and kind of bad business, they're focusing on the highest returns. So for them, corporate network was the place where they can target and find something. Now it's much easier for them to target home networks because there's persistent set of data that's valuable and critical for the business to operate. So their attention has shifted. What we're seeing a large uptick in phishing attacks because everyone is aware that the business has been disrupted. You can't just go and walk over to a CFO and ask, hey, did you send me this note? So a lot of impersonations, making sure that you conduct a training exercise, a phishing training exercise with your staff. It's kind of one of the easiest quick wins, but overall, we've seen that firms that are very diligent at making sure that they follow a protocol and perform regular cybersecurity exercises, they still see about a 30% uptick in how people are responding to phishing emails, because people are under pressure. They're trying to find some additional information about this disease or some additional news that can help them in their business, and they're clicking on things and they're providing information that they shouldn't be providing. So training is critical. Another aspect that we see as being very important is that, as John has mentioned, now you have a perimeter that's no longer secure, or you should assume that it's no longer secure. There's no single choke point. You are working on a device that might be sitting next to a device that's not secure at all. So it's critical that as a business, you deploy managed detection and response applications on devices that you are trying to protect. So overall, cybersecurity program for home offices is critical, but that might take some time. So if you're looking for a few quick wins, securing a laptop with managed detection and response software, whether you get it from RFA or another vendor, it's one of those things that you can do right now. For our clients, we're trying to help everyone to go through these difficult times. So there's a 60-day no fee onboarding process where for 60 days you don't have to sign any contracts where you have to pay or be locked in. So if you would like to take advantage of that offer, you can contact us. But there are many other providers that provide managed detection and response. And then on the aspect of response, that's also very critical, is that it's no longer an antivirus solution that you are installing on your laptop or a workstation at home. It's a managed solution that allows someone on the other end take quick actions. So the response time in these difficult times is critical, because you don't want someone to be sitting on your home network and listening to corporate messages and siphoning off data from your device. So those are kind of two quick wins that I wanted to mention. I know we have limited times and questions are starting to roll in. Is that go through cybersecurity exercises with your team, go through a phishing exercise, and make sure that you deploy a managed detection response solution for your workforce on your devices, even if they're not corporately owned. And then kind of a future takeaway is to go through a cybersecurity checklist for all home locations.
That's a fantastic point. I think one of the questions is what should be top of mind best practices for long-term continued work from the home environment. moving from reactive to this being the new normal? And I think that's a question that is on top of everyone's mind right now. Listen, the reality is this could be a time of data loss nightmare, right? So if you're not performing the checks that Michael's making reference to, you need to start now. One of the side benefits of this remote working is that for a large majority of us, because of the limitations just inherent in working from home versus being more productive in the office, we do have a little bit more free time in our day. And instead of just browsing the web or catching up on old emails, at least for the compliance professionals, uh, leverage that time to start doing these tests. Engage your network individuals, your IT resources. Network teams have tools placed on the peripheral of your networks that monitor traffic. They can give you insight that you weren't normally aware of. They know who your employees are communicating to, and they can tell you and they can identify trends. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to first perform as many tests as you can perform, whether they're phishing exercises, just general cybersecurity tests. Use the time to train your employees. If you have online training that's available to them, make sure that you're documenting that you're doing all of this proactively to stem any data loss or any breach that may come. As Michael said, assume the network's insecure at this point, and you want to make sure you start documenting that you're proactively working to secure the devices, the networks, and more importantly, any of the channels that you are as an organization deploying to facilitate the remote working, that you're capturing those technologies. Um, the other question that had come in, I know we're running a minute off, is there software or services specific to monitoring or signs that remote collaboration tools are being attacked or compromised? I think Michael can speak to some of the specific tools. Global Relay does have tools that you can deploy that will help you capture all of the content that's flowing in. The policies that you can apply to these communications will give you signs of issues with respect to potential attacks or employees that are communicating with phishing addresses and things along those lines. But I guess, Michael, from a cybersecurity perspective, what other tools would you recommend or services that RFA can provide that can assist?
Absolutely. So from our perspective, as I mentioned, is that it's important that enterprises look at their networks holistically. And now that home networks became part of the enterprise, you need to gather that information, aggregate that information, and look at it across a time frame that's longer than an instance when an issue is happening, right? Because what we are seeing is we're seeing dormant attacks that are happening over a prolonged period of time. It might be a day, it might be a week, but it's slowly escalating to a point where at first they're just listening and then they're trying to take action, whether to impersonate someone or just to siphon data. So from a perspective of a single tool, there is no silver bullet. There is nothing that you can download and say, I am protected. A few years ago, Baseline would be a good antivirus solution that utilizes AI technology, and there are several out there, including Silence. But now we feel that this is not enough because you need to establish trends. You need to look at anomalies, not just predefined things that have happened before that you're trying to capture, but to create a managed service that gathers information from your corporate network, gathers information from your personal device on your home network, and correlates this information and establishes trends on how you work, and then catches and alerts on any anomalies. So for example, if you usually don't access your data from your laptop at 12 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, it will raise an alert. Or if you've never accessed this information before, it will raise an alert. So it's critical that you look at managed services that allow you that level of granular insight into what's happening. So it's a situation where as you go forward and looking at getting back to normal, but at the same time leaving a significant number of your workforce working from remote locations, start looking at managed services that allow you to do this. Earlier question was talking about Citrix, and the notion is that even though Citrix allows you to securely access corporate networks without downloading information into your local machine, thus making a more secure environment. But what can happen if you have an unsecured local PC is that someone can install a password grabber and just log all the keystrokes that you are entering, and potentially compromise the security server as well, because they will be able to use your credentials to log in into that environment. So it's critical that you install managed components of cybersecurity on corporate networks, and from a cost-effective perspective, the prices have really became quite reasonable. So I think at this point, if we're looking forward about testing and reporting on aspects of your business, that you are protecting data and making sure that it's secure, it will become one of the core components of the future cybersecurity framework, making sure that you can report on everything that's out there and on the home environment.
Yeah, I mean that's key, right? I think what you need to do is ensure that you've got a test plan in place, execute on your test plan, document any gaps that you have identified, and start putting together plans to address those gaps. I think at a minimum, when the audits start sweeping across, what the regulators are going to want to see is, are you proactive? Did you follow your processes? Did you identify those gaps? Did you make any effort to identify the gaps and the risks? What have you done since then to try to resolve those gaps and put some protections to minimize risk? So all of these are critically important. I think testing comes to the top of mind. And just because we're running out of time, there's two additional questions here. And like I said, we will be distributing a recording so you can go back and look at the slides again and review the comments. But if I can try to quickly answer two of the other questions, which were specifically, what do you suggest for those using remote access desktops? My company uses Office 365, and that's how we're remotely connecting to our work computers. What kind of safeguards should we be adding to BCP? And sort of related is, how do you ensure compliant and secure setup of collaboration tools like Teams and Slack? I think Michael said it best with respect to ensuring that you're doing your cybersecurity reviews. That should be added to your BCP. So it's not just good enough that you've got business continuity, but your cybersecurity program needs to have a business continuity plan as well. And then with respect to all these collaboration platforms, be it Teams, Slack, or any of the others that might pop up between now and when things get back to the new normal, I would suggest that you reach out to vendors such as Global Relay. Obviously, there's other vendors out there that do similar things. We've got connectors. We stay ahead of the curve. We speak with our customers. We see where the industry goes, and we're proactively producing connectors to be able to capture the content that's required to meet your regulatory requirements. So if you haven't already done so, any of the platforms that your employees are using remotely, take an inventory, find out what folks are using, and then reach out to Global Relay or your vendor of choice and find out what tools are in play as far as options for you to enable and deploy, so that way you can put yourself in a better position moving forward and be prepared for any regulatory actions that are to come. And I think that we're out of time. I guess, Michael, any last words for the group?
I think what you just mentioned in terms of utilizing the vendors and subject matter experts to give you advice in these turbulent times is one of the key aspects. In regards to Teams and Slacks, there are different versions, different licenses that you can subscribe to. So it's critical that you choose the right one in order for you to get the compliance that you need for your firm. If you visit RFA.com, we have a COVID center. There's a checklist that you can go through to identify what you can do, easy wins, quick steps to secure your home network. Any questions regarding something that we've mentioned during this webinar, feel free to reach out to us. For RFA, just go to rfa.com and you can contact us there. Be more than happy to answer any other questions that you might have following this webinar. And thank you everyone for your time, and have a safe return to work and kind of stay safe.
Yep, same here. Thanks for your time, everyone. I hope you found it informative, and we look forward to speaking to you again real soon.